Well, I had so much fun going down the historic path of Tesla Boomer Mama that I just felt like I had to do it again. And so Larry Goldberg has generously offered to let us pick his life apart and find out what makes him tick just a little bit more, because, it's always nice when we're seeing Larry posit ideas or put up theories on X or here on the channel to just know a little bit more about you, Larry. That's all we want to do. That's what we're going to try to do.
I want to know how I come up with these crazy and wild ideas.
We'll get a little closer to understanding. Maybe we'll never really get there. All right. So what I'd like to start with is, because this is, after all, a Tesla crowd, we did the same thing with Alexandra, is a little bit about how you got introduced to either Elon Musk or to Tesla. Which one came first, and how did that work in terms of getting you to become the Tesla bull that you are today?
Well, I was born within less than 100 miles, maybe 50 miles from where Elon was born. I was born a lot earlier than Elon.
Yes, about 25 years, I say.
Yeah, a little bit more. I think he's 27 years. And the difference between us is not that many years, because we grew up in very similar circumstances, somewhat similar circumstances. My family unit didn't break up as his did under very dire circumstances. So that was a big difference. And obviously there's a huge intellectual gulf between us. I mean, he's one of the most brilliant people, of our age, if not of the last
age, right,
several hundred years. But our cultural background is not that different. I was born in a very, well, that doesn't matter. I mean, the point is, when I was a youngster, I built rockets.
Okay.
I was very interested in rockets, very interested in rocket flight. So much so that I actually wrote to Werner von Braun and got a letter back from him.
Wow.
I'm sure it was, a form letter, what I call the bug letter. Experimented with rockets at a young age. So about in early 2000, mid-2000s, 2008, 2009, I started reading about this guy, Elon Musk, that was building a rocket company. And then I discovered he was South African. And so I looked up SpaceX because I'd heard the name SpaceX, found their website, and found these incredible blog posts that Elon had written about how things were going. Each launch, not only each launch, but he would do a milestone, he'd do blog on a milestone basis. And they were beautifully written. I mean, they were fantastically well written. So, I like good writing. I'm an avid reader. And so I started following him. And then his blog post pointed me to his Tesla blog posts. And his Tesla blog posts were extremely interesting, because he was struggling at that time with the management of Tesla. It was, he had started Tesla with a bunch of partners. He was providing the money. They were presumably supplying the management skills. And he was blogging about where they were in the development of the Roadster. And he started writing quite honestly and quite frankly about the problems that they were having with the engineering, actually the financial side of the building, because he was discovering the bill of materials was like 4 times the price that they were positing to sell this thing at. Anyway, long story short, that got me intrigued. And then, he started by throwing out his co-founders,
right,
he brought in an Israeli CEO. He didn't last very long. And then ultimately, Elon took over the CEO-ship. And so I continued to follow both companies, SpaceX more avidly than Tesla, because I didn't see myself as a potential investor of Tesla until the Model S came out. And that Model S was a stunning revelation to me, that they could move from the road. I love the Roadster. You know, it's kind of cogitating about buying the Roadster, but it was really difficult outside of California to buy a Roadster for a couple of reasons. One of which was charging. Obviously, you could only use it as a hobby car without a charging network. And then they announced the Model S, and then the company went public. And that was my first dip. And I've been accumulating ever since. And my conviction has been growing ever since, not because of the fantastic cars. They are fantastic. And, you know, I've had, I think no, I haven't had a Model S. I've had, you know, Model 3, because the charging network took a bit of time to get to the south here in North Carolina. Anyway, the bottom line is that's how I got to be intrigued by Elon Musk. And I will tell you the most interesting part of the story, and you know, this gives you a sense of just how small South Africa is or was. My brother was friendly with Elon's dad.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, my elder brother is a consulting engineer, and he worked with me for a time in my business. And then he went he left, and he was, I think, representing a technical manufacturing company. He's an engineer, and he called on Elon Musk's father, who was in practice in Pretoria at the time. And Elon Musk's father actually gave him some career advice. They became friendly, and he gave him some career advice about starting his own consulting business, which he did ultimately. I'm not clear on all the details of the story, but you know, I mean, we read some pretty horror stories about Elon's father, particularly in Walter Isaacson's book. But Norman, my brother, liked Elon's father.
All right.
He saw the good side of the guy, not the crazy side of the guy.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So that's the story.
I see. All right. Well, so now, are you willing to divulge the cost of your first share that you bought?
I bought shares on the day of the IPO. You know, I want to say they were about $14 a share before all the splits.
Yeah.
In that range. You know, I'm not a detail guy when it comes to share prices, as you probably know by now. You know, I buy on a strategic basis. So the actual dollar cost of the share is not that important. I mean, sometimes I trade in options, and then every penny counts, but when I buy for the long term. So I think it was in the range of 14. There were purchases between $14 and $18, as I recall it.
And with all the splits and everything, that would put it under $1, I suppose.
I think there've been 5 splits, so that would be $3 to $5.
$3 to $5. Okay.
No, 5 splits. That would put it under $3 to $5 ish.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So interesting. Well, all right. Let's go ahead and take a little deeper dive into that South African part of your life, since that's you know, if we don't understand at least a little bit about who you were then, we know you were into rocketry. You were living in apartheid South Africa, so that must have been some kind of influence. You were Jewish in South Africa, so I'm a little curious about what your experience was in terms of anti-Semitism. So there's a couple of thoughts.
Well, you know, there's a saying in South Africa, "Ek was ook gebore." I was also born. And I was born into a Jewish family, a middle-class Jewish family. My father was a doctor. He was the local town doctor.
Okay.
Our town was a mined out mining town, basically.
Mined out. Okay.
Mined out. I mean, the gold was exhausted. The coal was exhausted. You know, it was a railway town because so we were on the outskirts of Johannesburg. The center of Johannesburg was about 25 miles from where we were. So you must understand that Johannesburg sits on a reef, on a rise that runs east to west. It sits in the middle. That rise was actually the gold pushing up up from deep down. The gold is like a saucer, and that saucer had risen and pressed up this so-called reef. It was called the White Waters Reef, or Witwatersrand.
Okay.
That Witwatersrand ran east to west, and the eastern part of that saucer was where the original gold, well, the original gold was discovered under Johannesburg, but the really rich initial gold was in the eastern part of the reef, and that's where Brakpan was, almost at the very periphery of the eastern rim. And so the mines really ran out in the 50s. I was born in 1946.
Right.
My father had been to war. He had volunteered. The South African Army was a volunteer army because the country was very split. The right wing, you know, what they call the Afrikaners, the right wing descendants of the Dutch, were very opposed to the war. They had aligned themselves with Hitler, many of them, not all of them by any manner of means, but the ruling party, not the ruling party, the party that represented them in parliament was very strongly right wing. And so the government under Jan Smuts, General Jan Smuts, who came from this Afrikaans background, who had fought the British in the Boer War, and who had actually captured Churchill. Interestingly enough, when Churchill was captured, you know, Churchill was long story. Anyway, Smuts was very aligned with Britain, and he was in power. His party, which was kind of the left wing of the Afrikaners, plus many of the English-speaking, who were much further left, and by left I mean quite center, because left in South Africa did not mean anything like the left you imagine of today. But they were very aligned with Britain. They threw their lot in with Britain in the World War, and they sent a volunteer army, a couple of divisions of men, up to the north of Africa, and they fought. They drove the Germans out of North Africa, and then proceeded on to Italy, where they, you know, were mired down for years in terrible, terrible fighting. My father joined them. He joined them, and as they shipped out to Africa, he was married to my mother, you know, just like the night before. He was given special dispensation to have a honeymoon. And so he wasn't with the main body of men. He actually was on a boat that kind of trailed the main body because his officer commanding gave him this honeymoon away. Anyway, he came back from the war pretty, I would say, a changed person. He'd gone away to the war, bon vivant, you know, very happy-go-lucky. He was a medical doctor at that point. He had had a great, you know, university time. He'd done a lot of stuff, but he came back from the war sobered, and I mean absolutely sober, never touched a drink after that in his life, throughout his life. and very serious. Didn't lack humor, but wasn't spontaneously humorous. And so he found it necessary to, settle in this backwater. In fact, Brakpan means brackwater.
Oh, wow. Oh,
So they're literally a backwater. And so we were brought up in this home where, he was very disciplined and quiet, and it didn't suit me. And my father and I didn't see eye to eye until much later in life. And he lived with us in the last years of his life, and he and I were very, very close in those late years. But he came back, from a very tough war, a lot of stories about that. And so he settled in Brakpan. He was like the railway doctor, that he served all the people who worked for the railway. So railways were a big part of Brakpan life. It had been supporting the mines. He was also a mine doctor, but the mines were, as I said, thinning out. And he also was in charge of the tuberculosis hospital. We had a huge tuberculosis hospital, one of the largest in the world, over 5,000 people there. Wow. Because a lot of, tuberculosis had infected a huge proportion of the population. So that was my early life, in this. And then at the age of 5, I developed this disease. Today, kids have it and they survive with it, and they just go to school and treat it in the normal way. In those days, you went to hospital, and I was in hospital for 2.5 years. They thought it was polio at first.
Wow.
You lose the use of your leg.
Wow.
Because the head of the femur, where the hip bone just kind of disintegrates. And so you have to, anyway, in those days, they put you in bed, and I was in bed for like 2.5 years at the age of between the ages of, I think, 6 and 8.5. And then I was in calipers. I was in irons for another 6 months, maybe even a year. And so I never played sports. I was hopeless, I was, just hopeless with sports, and still am. And that affected my childhood greatly, and probably my life, because, I became a bookworm. And I even wrote books. I wrote these, I had these exercise books, and I would write these stories. It was a different upbringing.
Yeah.
And, it had a lot of impact on my life. So if you see that the Churchill books in my library, I read very deeply and became very interested in the history of the Second World War. The history of modern Europe from, from the 1870s to modern day. And so that was my upbringing. That's how and growing up in South Africa was very tough for a little Jewish boy, because firstly, I was a runt, very short, very small, had a little bit of a limp. And so I was picked on by, some of these young Afrikaans boys who had, this antipathy towards Jews. And so I was the 𝐒𝐿, and it was rough. Okay. So that was it.
So how do you think that impacted you, years later? Or, did you have a sense that was I mean, you and I have talked about my experience growing up in a Jewish neighborhood and things that I saw. I mean, were there aspects of that for you that continued to impact your thinking, through your life?
Yeah, I didn't identify very strongly with the Jewish community. I did go through my bar mitzvah. They had to take me you know, kicking and screaming, drag me kicking and screaming up to the shul to say my piece. I didn't learn my piece. They had to coach me in the last minutes. My mother used to give me what amounted to 10 cents to take the bus to town to go to my Hebrew lessons. We called the Cheder. The Cheder happened to the shul, the synagogue happened to be right next door to the snooker saloon. So I would take the money, put it in my pocket, walk to town, play snooker. I became, you know, a very strong snooker player and earned a lot of money doing that.
Okay.
And not attend, you know, synagogue.
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting upbringing. And yeah. And my father dabbled in farming, lost a lot of money in dabbled with farming. But so the boys spent a lot of time on the farm. I hated it because I'm not very good with manual stuff. My brother was a mechanic. He loved all that stuff. Elder brother. My younger brother was a little bit young, but I hated it. But you know, nonetheless, that was an exposure we had.
And what about the other side of that discrimination, if you will? What about the apartheid at that time? What about how did that impact?
It was terrible to be brought up in that environment. Shocking. It you know, as I think back to it, it was so difficult not to be impacted by that because you had black servants.
Right.
It was like the American South in many ways, and it was extremely hard not to see, not to become part of it, and it was even harder to reject it because it, you know, it was very difficult socially, but also politically, and so it was terrible. It was really, really terrible. And you know, the people on the farms, all the laborers on the farms were black. And, you know, for a young kid growing up where all the black people are like the laborers and all the white people are the bosses, you grow up and you completely turned upside down. Now, you know, when I went to high school I came to high school in the United States under a AFS scholarship and saw the world upside down. Now, I'd done a huge amount of reading at high school. So Time magazine was like I used to read that cover.
In the world.
Yeah, in fact, at a school reunion, a friend of mine said, all I remember about you is that you used to read Time magazine cover to cover every week. It was my window to the world, not just Time magazine, but, you know, a whole lot of American publications and British publications. I was a Anglophile, and all of them about current affairs. And so it was very easy for me to see through this window in the world what the real world was about. And then I got to actually experience it when I came to the United States, and I stayed in Scarsdale, which is in Westchester County, north of the city of New York. And we spent a lot of time in the city of New York. So very liberal society, and it was very easy to enter that society from all the studies that I'd done, you know, and in fact, in the sort of current affairs class, I forget what it was particularly called. I was like the lead student because I knew all the stuff, and I wasn't even an American.
Right.
And so growing up in South Africa for a Jewish kid in a small, I won't say rural, but a broken down industrial town with a wrenchingly poor white population and a, you know, what amounted to a slave-backed population was a window to a terrible world and a tremendous contrast as I grew up and I moved to the major cities of Johannesburg and then Cape Town, I began to see a wider world, joined a milieu of white people who had a vision of a different South Africa. And also was exposed to a different world in the United States. It was easy to see, just what was wrong with South Africa. But I will say that we left South Africa in 1980 with no sense that this country was ever going to see the light. We thought there was going to be a civil war of massive proportions, and that there would be, terrible death.
Right.
And that Mandela was able to rise above this and sort of create this rainbow nation, as he called it, was a miracle that I didn't expect to happen. I couldn't have foreseen. I'm not sure we would have stayed even with the promise of that, because in fact, after Mandela, the country has just declined so dramatically. So it's really hard. It would have been hard to have stayed.
So I always love to know what somebody thought when they were 12 years old, 13 years old, what you thought you were going to be when you grew up.
Yeah, well, I went through the engineering phase, the rocket engineering phase at that point. Post that point, I started seeing myself as a diplomat.
As a diplomat?
Yeah, I was really interested in, foreign affairs. I saw myself as the potential Secretary of State of the United States.
There you go. All right.
I was, what inspired me more than anything else was John F. Kennedy. I learned his inaugural speech off by heart. I can still spout it off today. I was very fortunate to have met him when we were in the United States. I was really, I really participated in that dream that he had. I was very focused on international affairs. I'd studied European history, modern European history, and then US history came to me naturally, and so I studied that. So all of that came, was what I was entranced with as a kid.
And then in terms of university, what degree did you end up with? And
actually, none. I had a terrible problem at school that today it's called ADHD, and couldn't sit
still. Yeah.
It was a pain. It was very painful. And even though I did well at school and did well when I came to US high school, I sat for 6 months in Colombia. I said, no, this is not going to happen for me. I also tried in Cape Town, but it just wasn't going to happen. And so I became self-taught. Became self-taught, and all my career has been, I can concentrate and exclude everything for hours at a time when I'm pursuing something of interest to me. But to follow a course, to sit still in a lecture that I'm not interested in the subject, it's not possible. It's a condition that seems to become less intense as you grow older and older. But yeah, all my learning has been from books. I have read very deeply on many subjects. I'm not like Elon. I wasn't able to read the whole Encyclopedia Britannica. I'll tell you, as a kid, I gave it a pretty good start.
So did you then end up being employed a few times before you started?
No, I was, from the beginning, I ran my own business. Probably have started 20 businesses in my
20?
lifetime. Yeah, and 20 companies, and kind of centered ultimately on IT, and have really become quite knowledgeable in some areas of IT. Written books on it, technical books, not popular books, and several patents, and built several businesses around IT. My business has always been based upon some engineering. So as a kid, I started a recording studio and ran a recording studio for a while. And that was, we built our own equipment. Now, I did have an Ampex deck, tape deck, but we built the electronics for it. We built our own mixing desk. And so that, that's kind of the way I've done it all my life. And then, it has been a very strong focus of mine, always around technical subjects. I'm not an engineer. I don't pretend to be an engineer, but I'm an extremely good software conceptual engineer, and so have spent a lot of time building software, a lot of companies building software and executing software, and so done that in 3 continents and quite successfully.
So what would you consider to be the first real business that you started? I mean, I don't know, maybe the recording business was a real business, but
no, it wasn't really. I mean, it never made money.
okay. All right. So, well, I've had, I've started a bunch of companies, and a lot of them did never make any money. So,
Yeah, well, we built some big businesses in South Africa that ultimately, I moved on to England, and, in those days, you could not take your money out of South Africa.
yeah.
And so, whatever happened, it was like monopoly money,
Right.
really.
Right.
And we moved to England in 1980, and there we had a software company that which tracked containers, container tracking software.
Okay.
That was started. A cousin of mine had a container company where he had a fairly substantial fleet of containers, and we had built some software for him and managed that software, and then built that into a company, and then ultimately sold that to British Rail. I think it was like £600,000, which was about $1 million in those days, which was real money in those days.
Yeah.
And then moved, and then the plan was to move to the US, and we did. And so by the time I came to the US, I'd had, pretty strong experience, both building companies and also building software. And so we hung up a shingle. I hung my shingle up and called myself Simple Software.
Simple Software. Okay.
Yeah, that was my first company in the US, and we hung that shingle. And that company ultimately became a company called PowerFlex Software. So you went from Simple Software to PowerFlex. And that transition was Simple Software was building bespoke software. We built software for people. And in that process, we built quite a lot of software for a lot of different companies. Nobody was building really professional software for PCs. That was our focus. Because in South Africa, I had acquired my first Commodore 64 and then an Apple computer, and then realized that PCs were actually going to change the world, because what we'd done in South Africa was all based on mainframes. So came to the US, realized that this was where it was going. And so the whole idea of Simple Software is that we could put powerful software on PCs that you could use, gainfully employed. So we started using third-party, commercially off-the-shelf software for the accounting and finance back end of everything we did, and we found this stuff was terrible. So we wrote our own, and that turned into PowerFlex software. And so for the middle market, we were kind of the, I don't know, supply chain and accounting software. And we became a national brand, really, and built that into a fairly significant company, which we sold in 1999, in June of 1999. It was the peak of the dot-com craze.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
we were pretty well positioned. And so that was, now along the way, during those years from 1980 to 1999, we had built several software divisions, which we had sold independently. So that had worked very well. The largest of which was like a software for comparing pricing and outcomes for procedures in hospitals across a fairly large group of hospitals in the Southwest. Then ultimately we sold that software the rights to that software to that group of hospitals, or at least the consulting arm of that group of hospitals. And then and some other products that we developed and ended up selling as a piece of the company. And then we sold the company in June of 1999, and to an Israeli-based public software company. And I joined them here in the US, and then ultimately became kind of the manager of the US, ran the US for them. And
for how long?
Oh, that for about 5 years.
For 5 years, because that's hard. I tried to do that and I couldn't do it. I only lasted 9 months when I sold my company.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that I stayed is that I formed a really strong relationship with the guy who was running the company at that point, running the US operation at that point. And then he wanted to move on. He had an opportunity to move on. He said, look, I need you to stay for another couple of years to make sure that this thing runs okay. I don't want a bad mark on my resume. It suited me because, functionally I could have called it a day at that point. But so I did. And they tried to run it from Israel, but we ran the company here, and we were quite successful, actually. And then I moved on. I retired in 2004, I think. And that was my first retirement, actually.
Your first retirement, yeah.
And then a friend whom I had worked with, we had built a huge project at the IRS. IRS, it's a long story, but we'd built this huge project at the IRS. So you have to go back to my PowerFlex days. The key to PowerFlex was that we could build externally modules that the software didn't have when we sold it to the company, but it would automatically fit into the main branch. So we'd externalize what we called the business logic.
Okay.
And when we built this solution for the IRS, the reason that they hired us is because we had this rules capability, this rules engine capability, and we had hired an external company to do the professional services around gathering the rules that you wanted to put into your software and formalizing them before they put it into our software. And this was a company out of New Jersey that was run by this lady who was really quite brilliant. She had a really fantastic background in this field. And we'd worked together in terms of us supplying the technology, she supplying the methodology, and we built this capability for the IRS. We worked very well with this company. When I retired, she and I spoke at length about building some sort of formal solution for defining business requirements or business rules, as they called it in those days. And we started batting around some ideas, and then we developed this notion of what we call decision management or decision model that was based upon some fairly rigorous formalisms. And we thought we'd write a paper about it. And so one of the projects I took on was this retirement. In retirement was this idea that we'd write this paper, and we did. We started writing the paper, and the paper became very long, and the paper became a book. And we said, you know what, we have a book, and we got a publisher, a very good publisher, who was very excited with it, and so we published it. This was about 2007, and it took like a couple of years to get the book out. In that time, we'd taken this idea and we started running with it. I started calling on some old clients and some friends, and before you knew it, we had some major clients using this project. We had, a company like Freddie Mac and a company like JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo, and we very soon this project turned into an idea that had become, the time had come for this idea in information technology theory, and the book was a pretty big success, and several standards bodies had sort of picked up on this idea, and so they created a standard around this stuff. And Barbara, my partner, and I became members of this group that put this together. And we formed this company. And before long, we'd built, pretty strong little company. And we got bought out in 2014 after building, fairly solid little business. So I kind of edged into it, and it became a big business. In that same time, I had, in some of the consulting work that I'd done for the company in that time, became quite friendly with a young Indian gentleman, who very young, hardly out of college, and he had started a business around business requirements for IT, and he was very excited young man, and I helped sponsor him, and that became a business in itself. And we set up shop in India, actually, where we would sell to companies this idea of building prototypes of the software they wanted to build using some tools that are on the market. And what we would do is we would consult to them during the day, build the stuff in India overnight, and then present it to them. And that became a fairly significant business, which we built up in India. We formed a company in India. So, before I knew it, by 2007, I was in 2 companies running these businesses. And my role was really twofold. One is talking to clients, helping clients sign on, but also at the architectural level, at the conceptual architectural level. And by 2009, I brought my son in to help run the decision company which we'd built, and he came in, and actually I brought him in to run the Indian company, and we just found the decision company had just taken off, and so we sold that company in India, and we focused on the Indian. So that was the whole story. So by 2014, the decision company had become fairly significant, and I ended up. My partner wanted to retire. This was like her third round. She wanted to retire, and it was time. And so we sold the company in 2014, I think the end of 2014. And I stayed with the company after we sold it. I kept a minority stake in it, and I stayed with it for several years. I think I actually only sold that minority stake at the end of last year.
I remember well when you're going
Yeah,
through.
yeah. But my son is still with the company, and he
Yeah,
runs that company
he
today.
runs the company. Okay.
Yeah.
So we know you have one son. I understand that you have more than one son, or more
I have
than
a
one
daughter
child.
and a son.
A
Son
daughter.
and my son has 2 sons, and my daughter has 3 daughters.
All right. So it sounds like that
It's
Elon
a full house.
would be proud. You've
No, I don't measure up to Elon's standards.
but at least you've propagated. You've kept it going.
Yeah, yeah.
And
And those are good kids. I think we'll keep the generations going.
yeah. Okay, so then you were a Kennedy, a huge fan of Kennedy, a huge fan of obviously of Churchill. Were there other leading lights that you found attractive during that period where you were kind of getting this world view of history and of current affairs?
Yeah, so Reagan was a great, I mean, if you look at the great presidents of my time, I was born in the age of Truman.
Right.
As Truman was passing the baton to Eisenhower. I was not a great fan of Eisenhower's. In my latter years, I began to understand some of his wisdom. But he was a gray presence in my pantheon. So Reagan really, was a great pinnacle. I really was not crazy about either of the Bushes, and certainly, I think Clinton grew on me a little bit. I'm very strongly opposed to Mrs. Clinton, but President Clinton, he presided over a very successful economy, very successful economy. And probably the peak of what Reagan had delivered to the country. And so I think he deserves some respect, and that's looking back rather than looking forward.
Right. So would you call yourself? I know I call myself a pragmatist. Reagan was a pragmatist. Certainly Churchill was a pragmatist. I don't know about Kennedy so much. He might have been a little bit more of a straight up politician, but the other ones and now your recent decision with Trump, he's definitely a pragmatist. Is that do you think the entrepreneur in you is inclined towards folks that are not so ideological and more pragmatic?
I think idealism plays a very important role. Great admirer of Maggie Thatcher.
Oh yeah,
Admirer of Maggie Thatcher, because I saw the catastrophe at first hand, what happened in Britain under the consecutive Labour governments, and even the Conservative governments post the war, and even under Churchill. Churchill was aged out and had a very poor second innings. Then we had these terrible Labour governments. I mean, shocking. And, Maggie Thatcher really turned it around. Britain hasn't had the like since.
the
So
Iron
it's
Lady.
great. great fan of hers. I wouldn't call myself a pragmatist. I would say I am still an idealist. And to be honest, that's why I really disliked Trump. I mean, I don't like Trump's character. I'm really put off by his character. And as I shared with you, I really dislike the fact that he's, as a business person, he's stiffed his small vendors. So I wouldn't call myself a pragmatist. I would say I'm I have ideals, very strong ideals. I certainly wouldn't I certainly would like a president that has a vision for the country, and a vision for the country that everybody can share in. I think Trump may end up being a good leader, He didn't do badly in his first term. He kind of spoilt it the way he went out. Wasn't
gracious.
It wasn't gracious. You could say that.
I think we can all agree on that one.
And, that's the problem with him. He just can't get out of his ego. He can't get out of the way of his ego. He just cannot. His ego is all encompassing. Other than that, I mean, I think we've seen him go through a transformation. It'd be interesting to see what comes out at the other end.
That will be interesting. So I don't know if you want to talk about it much, but it's certainly up to you. You have a talented wife who has continued her career, even if you claim to retire over and over again.
My wife has had a stellar career. So her first career was against everything she stood for. Her first great career was in business.
Okay.
So she was a teacher.
Okay.
An art teacher, a very talented art teacher, taught at some of the best schools in Cape Town, came to the United States and started a business. So I think I infected her with the bug. And she built a chain of art schools.
Oh, wow.
Had 5 art schools across the Carolinas, and she ran summer programs, summer camps. I mean, one summer she had over 1,000 kids across 3 or 4 campuses. But every year she had the Gifted and Talented Development Center at Queen's University in Charlotte. It became an institution. And the year I sold my company, I sold it in 1999. In 2001, I think, or 2000, she sold her camp and schools.
I see.
And so we kind of retired at the same time. And she went on to work for the company that bought her business. She retired in 2005 and stayed retired. Well, I say retired. She took up painting. She became an artist. She'd always painted, but she became a very, very, successful artist. I mean, successful artist. It's really difficult to be a successful artist from a commercial perspective, but she's done some marvelous work. That piece behind me there is a painting of hers that actually is very South African, and you can't see the detail of it, but I mean, she's done magnificent work, and she's had art shows at good museums, and she's in several good museums. So she's done well.
Very nice. Very nice. So looking back.
In fact, I'll tell you, this trip to Europe
was
on her dime.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah, it was on in a residency that she was awarded. We went to stay for 3 months. I was the house husband. I did the not the cooking. she did the cooking, but I did all the shopping and the carrying and anyway, that was it. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Oh, okay, I was just going to say, so, looking back over this really storied career, and it's kind of interesting because I think the commonality between you and Tesla Boomer Mama is that awareness of opportunity, not necessarily casting a big long vision like an Elon Musk, but rather it's more like, okay, there's an opportunity, and then you make something of that opportunity. Another opportunity comes along, and you go over and make that opportunity into something. Both of you, and my whole career is exactly that. Is really being able to chase after opportunities. But almost everybody that I've run into that's at the success level that you are has a one or two moments that they would call their pinnacle moments. They're the days, the moments where either they did better than they thought they could, or maybe they did better than their dad ever thought they could, or maybe they made their dad proud for the first time, or their mom, or that kind of stuff. So have you got one or two of those that you'd share?
It's an interesting question. I think, in the business sense, sealing the deal when you sell to a major corporation like one of the world's big banks, and you seal the big deal, that's always a fantastic moment. When you close a deal, when you sell a company, that's a big moment. I'd say that the big moments really are the small moments that are so valuable. I think when I think back to my retirement, and the sort of the warmth and the support of this very large group of people, I think that was a particular moment. I'm not one who I don't see that I pursue the opportunities.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I pursue my passion. So
Okay.
the companies I've built are always around ideas that I've evolved and pursued, and sometimes not necessarily that profitable or that valuable, but intrigued me as being something of value and something worthwhile. And so, bringing the focus to decision management, which was really my, I'm one of a group of maybe half a dozen people that was responsible for making this all happen. And it's become quite important, and particularly important in this day of AI.
Yeah.
To me, it was a major accomplishment, but it's not an accomplishment that you could say, oh, this was a major moment that, such and such. So that's the kind of thing that excited me.
So it wouldn't be the first time that Elon Musk answered one of your posts?
Not really. No, I mean, I appreciate his answer to my posts. I really do. Because I have an enormous respect for his intellectual capacity and his intellectual prowess. I admire, and I've written about it, I admire his business judgment as much as I admire his scientific judgment. I think that he has an acute sense of how to build a company as much as he has an acute sense of how to build a product, a technical product. And I've seen it again and again and again. Anybody who can repeat that level of success multiple times is extraordinary, because so often success in business is serendipitous.
There's always luck, always an element of luck.
But he has done it again and again and again and again.
At major levels.
At at levels that we can't even begin to dream of. So, I have this immense amount of respect for that, as much as I have a respect for his engineering prowess, which is extraordinary, and so getting a response from him is very meaningful.
So your last few years, I know because you and I have become quite close, I know that you've had lots of activity with selling the old company and still working with them. And, you certainly travel and enjoy your family, but you're spending a big amount of time on X and on programs like mine, talking about Tesla and SpaceX and even all the other companies and Elon.
Yeah, but there's a motive, there's an ulterior motive.
So what's the alternative?
I get a huge number of people saying, I have this business and I'm interested in being funded.
Yeah.
And so I have a little business.
VC business.
It's not so little anymore. I have a VC. I'm interested in investing in particular types of businesses. And it's interesting because they range from very, 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 very early stage to, later stage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't invest a huge amount of money in any one of them. I invest a relatively small amount of money, but I invest when I can add value.
Right.
And so when I'm on your program or on anybody else's podcast on X, it's kind of like hanging out my shingle and saying, talk to me. Now, I don't invest in more than 1 out of 100 of these
the ones you see. Yes, of course. Yeah.
But I get to see some of the very best.
Okay. Well, it seems to me, I just, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe I've misjudged you entirely, but it seems as if that would be what would you call it? A side benefit. You seem to be you seem to enjoy the X activity and the YouTube activity a lot.
I do.
Yeah.
I do, because it suits my intellectual curiosity, and also it fits you. If you have ADHD, then you really focus on the things that you love.
Yes.
I don't really have that anymore. I can concentrate on stuff but it's really very engaging. It's intellectually engaging, and I learn a lot of stuff from a lot of people. It's a fantastic way to get the news.
Yeah.
And of course, I remain very interested in current and world affairs.
Right. And then again, and the other part, to me, I'm sure it is for you, is you share an idea. And as Elon says, you get this immediate feedback.
Yes.
You have this feedback loop, which any smart entrepreneur wants. Elon talks about it, but it's a superpower in his case. But getting honest feedback about ideas that you put forward, there's nothing like X and even YouTube to get that feedback loop going. So
Well, I do an enormous amount of analysis in every investment that I make, and what's really good about X is that you can share that analysis and get feedback, as you point out, and very often you'll find that you made a mistake, and and you can advocate for your point of view, but when you've made a mistake, you've made a mistake, and so when you're wrong, and it's really good to find out you're wrong before it costs you money.
A lot of money, yes, right. And do you use decision tree software in making your investment decisions, or do you only use the decision tree in your brain to?
Yeah, so it's not really a decision tree, but that's all right. It's a decision model, and it sometimes does look like a tree, but it's the way I think. I mean, I've learned to think that way. So all that decision model does is break the decision logic down into what we call normalized structures where each component of the decision is complete in and of itself. And that completion means that the next level of the decision uses solid information to make its decision. And so that's how it becomes a tree or looks like a tree. And that helps inform, by the way, AI, because we can test AI, at multiple levels in the decision that it makes. So, and we can use AI to create those decision trees. Yes, I do use that. I do break down my decisions into first order logic, and I use that as a way to check myself in the decisions I make from a business perspective, which doesn't mean I don't lose money from time to time.
Yeah, right. Of course. Yeah, no kidding. Well, yeah. If we're invested in Tesla at all, we have all lost, at least on paper, from time to time. I suppose
That's not a loss. I mean, I mean, people
right.
talk about that, but if a stock goes down, I don't lose money. If a stock goes up, I don't make money.
Right.
I make money or lose money when I sell a stock that I've bought.
So Larry, I've covered a little bit about South Africa. We didn't really talk much about London. I know you spent a lot of time there. We haven't talked about Israel. Are there parts of your journey in London or Israel that bear some interesting additional interesting views into who you are?
Israel's interesting because I've developed some very deep relationships with many of the Israel counterparts. We were controlled by an Israeli board, an Israeli group of managers, and twice in my career. And I've learned a lot about the Israeli society. It's an intensely personal set of relationships that you form in Israel. People in Israel don't have, relationships that are business to business. I mean, if you don't form an intense relationship, forget about it. Just don't do business. I mean, it's intense, absolutely intense. Everything in Israel is intense to the nth degree. So that's interesting. Everything in London is exactly the other way around. There's no intensity in personal relationships. Personal relationships are transactional, purely transactional. I'd say in the United States, we kind of
Yeah, well, yes,
a little bit of both. But man, I mean, in Israel, it is, if you don't love the guy, you don't work with the guy. That's it.
Wow. Yeah.
Oh, the guy, gal. I mean, it doesn't make any.
Sure. Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've ended up though in Carolina.
Yeah, we've been in North Carolina for 40 some years.
Yeah. So, and you've seen the world, and so you must have concluded that that's the closest, as close as you're going to get to California in terms of perfection.
I had an office in California for 20 years.
I'm sorry?
I had an office in California for
okay.
20 years, and I used to commute backwards and forwards from the Carolinas. So we had an office in Signal Hill.
Okay.
For 20 years, and I had a partner, my PowerFlex software company. I had a partner, and he lived in Long Beach, and we had a very close relationship. In fact, I saw him just a couple of years, a year and a half ago. He's older than I am. He's still hanging in there. Yeah. Yeah, so I love California. I just don't love the politics of California.
No. But they were a lot better when you came to the United States. But so I know my son, as I've mentioned, has recently moved to North Carolina, and just a couple hours from you, I guess. And he seems to like it really well. But this home that you got to choose turned out to be good for you.
Didn't choose it. My brother was a doctor. He'd been to University of Virginia and done his internship there, and then he got recruited into a practice in Charlotte.
Hmm.
So we visited him, and when we had decided to move, we spent, December with him. We loved, we went skiing in Blowing Rock. We traveled the state. It was fantastic. And so he was settled there. My father and mother came and settled there where they were. And so we were in London at the time, but we came here. And then my elder brother came as well. And so we had all our kids and our parents, and we all were in Charlotte for that 20 years. And then I moved from Charlotte to the Triangle simply because I sold my company to this Israeli company that was, their US operations were based out of here, out of the Triangle. So that's how, we came to sort of spread ourselves. And my son went to Chapel Hill. And, once you're in Chapel Hill, that's it, man. And so we came to settle here, and, and his son will probably go to Chapel Hill. His son is, will graduate in the coming year and probably will go to Chapel Hill.
All right. So, Larry, we've covered a ton of stuff. But I think it's only fair that, I've asked all the questions up till now. I think it's only fair that you get to ask yourself a question, or in other words, that if there's anything I've left out that you think is important, if somebody wants to truly get who Larry Goldberg is, what would that be?
I think if I were to advise my younger self, I would say patience. I was an impatient young man, and I think I would have been far more successful in my career if I'd had more patience. And, some people say, oh, you've been so successful. Well, only in relative terms, but if I were to score myself, I would say that if I had more patience, I would have achieved more. Not from a financial point of view. Financially, I'm, very comfortable, and that's not an issue. But, it's not usual for a startup, and I advise a lot of startups and young people in startups, and I don't advise them to have patience, but it's not normal to have patience there. But what I do advise them is to see beyond today's, the burning issue of today. And it's very hard in a startup not to look at the burning issue of today,
right?
To think about what comes after. The company's going to blow up tomorrow because of this, and no money. But think about if we resolve this today and we get the money, what does that mean for tomorrow? And what we do today, how will it impact us tomorrow? And how will we prevent, the challenges of tomorrow from becoming challenges by making better decisions today? So it's really, really hard to see beyond the burning, issues of the moment. And that's where I think I would have done a whole lot better.
All right. But today you're much more patient.
No. Equally impatient. Maybe I am more patient.
I know that you're always promoting the idea of patience with Tesla stock.
Yeah.
It's going to come 2026, no matter what. It doesn't matter whether we get more or less cars this quarter or next quarter. It's all about 2026 when everything comes together. Or
27 or 28. I mean, we don't know what the macro is going to bring in 25 and 26.
Right.
We don't know.
No.
And the macro can have a huge impact on this.
Yes.
And there may be other, externalities. So we have a great company. We're invested in a great company. And when you're invested in a great company, you're not looking at the valuation of that company today or tomorrow. Now, if you're going to need the money in 2 years' time because you have to go to college, or you're going to need the money in 2 years' time because you have a baby, or you're going to need the money because you have to buy a house, that's a completely different issue. And if that's going to be an issue, then you should not be invested in a company like Tesla.
That's a fact.
So if you're investing in Tesla, you're investing in Tesla because it's a great company.
Yeah.
And if it's a great company, you're not invested for it today or tomorrow. Or I don't want to spend more time telling you about the investments that I had in a company called Liberty Life, or an investment in a company called, Amazon.
Right.
Those investments, they were life-changing as much as a, good outcome of of a startup that you created. And they're only life-changing because over time they did so well. But if you bought Amazon in 1998 and, it was Amazon.toast in 2001, everybody was laughing at everybody. I had a friend who made $1 million selling Amazon short, and he laughed at me because I was long Amazon. And I bumped into him, a couple of years ago, and I said, that $1 million, the money he invested to make that $1 million today would be worth tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
So all I'm trying to say is, if there's a message I want to give people, it is, do not say I lost or made money because my stock went up or went down. You didn't lose or make anything. If you bought that stock for the long term, forget about what it's worth today or tomorrow.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, Larry, it has been fantastic. I appreciate you coming on, and I'm hoping that people will, the whole purpose of this is, I mean, sure, people are going to gain maybe something in terms of motivation or new ways of thinking or whatever, but the main purpose is you're a figure on X, you're a figure on YouTube. And I think it's good if, people get a chance to kind of just get to know these individuals who are a figure in our little community, get to know them a little better. So thank you again for coming on.
Thanks, Randy.
All right. And to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.